Guys, the downfall of Newcastle needs to be studied. This summer transfer window by Newcastle needs to be studied for all time terrible transfer windows and misunderstandings of where you are in the pecking order when it comes to the Premier League. A team like Newcastle needed to be smarter and savvier when they were planning for this transfer window. And again, I think a huge issue is there isn't much planning because they don't have a sporting director and they don't have someone planning out these transfers. So instead, you just have an owner of a club going after the biggest targets that they see are available this summer. But the problem with that is when you are going after those targets, so is every other major team. And I don't think Newcastle realize where they are in the pecking order. Because the difficult issue to understand as a Newcastle supporter and as a Newcastle fan is you're in the Champions League. You have players like Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes, and you still have Alexander Isak, and you have Anthony Gordon. You have these world-class players. You have these, not world-class, but you have these really, really above-average players that bring you to new heights. You're in the Champions League, but you're still not in that pecking order. You're still not in that Big Six. And what they've done this summer has been so poorly planned. I think it might be the downfall of Newcastle, because I just want to go through these signings that they've missed out on. So they missed out on James Trafford. They bid in around like 30 million euro, and he was willing to come to Newcastle, but in the clause for the James Trafford signing, Manchester City has a clause that they could buy him back first since he was sold by Manchester City to Burnley. They take him back. They went in for Dean Huijsen. I think that was more of a really, really optimistic signing that they were hoping for. Real Madrid takes him. No harm, no foul there. Hey, if you can get someone like that, I don't see why you wouldn't. But the Guehi, you aren't willing to pay what Crystal Palace wanted last summer, and now he might go to Liverpool. So that's that's terrible. Brian Mbeumo, who would instantly walk into your starting 11 and improve your right wing position where you were starting Jacob Murphy half of the season, who actually had a decent season, but everyone is aware that Jacob Murphy, when you are a Champions League team and you are trying to make it back to the Champions League again, cannot be your starting right winger. You try to go in for Brian Mbeumo, but you are aware that Arsenal and Manchester United also want him. There was even rumors about Liverpool wanting him. You know you're not going to win that transfer race. Why? And you're not even willing to spend the amount of money that Manchester United were. Why are you wasting time on that? Then the João Pedro. They wanted João Pedro as a striker option if Alexander Isak walks out the door. They lose out to him. They lose out to him to Chelsea. They don't make that signing. Mohamed Kudus, who again would have been instantly walking into your starting 11 as a right winger. You can't compete with the likes of Spurs, who aren't even in the Champions League. They just finished in like 15th, and you still aren't able to compete with them for Mohamed Kudus. That should have been the warning bell. That should have sounded the alarm. Hey, what we're doing is not going to work. These players still don't see us as this upper echelon of a team. They don't see us as these Big Six clubs. We need to now move to something else. We need to have different visions on our transfer window. We need to sign players that maybe are even lower half of the table squads, their best players, not always just looking for a Brian Mbeumo. But I think like someone like a Yoan Wissa is a smart move. That is Brentford's second best player. Their best player is going to go to one of the top 6 teams. You get their second best player. That's not a bad move. That's smart. They've missed out on Liam Delap to Chelsea as well. Chelsea signed João Pedro and Liam Delap before Newcastle could even sign a striker. They wanted Hugo Ekitike. He goes to Liverpool. And now, the worst of it all is Benjamin Sesko. You bid 90 million euro and you have Champions League football and you have one of the best projects in Europe right now. And he chooses to go to Manchester United for 85 million euro, 5 million euro less, because he sees Manchester United as still the big six, as a step up in his career. And when he looks at Newcastle, he sees it almost as the exact same thing as RB Leipzig. And that is the problem. You need to find players when you are doing this rebuild to where now you're pushing for top four that are excited to come to Newcastle, that this would be such a huge step in their career. Almost like when Arsenal were doing their rebuild and Mikel Arteta, when he was missing out on signings or he was interested in a player and they wouldn't get him, he would always talk about, if you're not dying to come play for Arsenal, we're not dying to have you. And Newcastle need to adopt that same mantra, that same mindset. If you're not dying to come to Newcastle United, then we're not going to even put in a bid. We're going to now have a little bit different of a perspective on the transfer window. We're going to go for different players, maybe players in League One, maybe players in the Bundesliga that are a little lower down, but can come in and bring some sort of class to the starting 11. But I think this transfer window could be the start of the downfall of Newcastle and their consistent top four finishes, because they finished top four 2 of the last 3 seasons, which is a great accomplishment. But you're letting your best player go, most likely Alexander Isak. If he doesn't, he's under duress. He wanted to leave. He was training with Real Sociedad because you weren't letting him come and train. There's now reports saying if he wants to come and train, he has to gain the trust and the respect of the team back. That is a player under duress. I don't know if he'll be able to perform at the same level he has in the past for Newcastle. And also, he is an injury-prone player, so all it takes is him getting injured, and now your best player is gone either through injury or he's gone through transfer. He's gone out the window through a transfer. You're selling your best player, and you haven't replaced him. Your center back partnership is getting old and injury prone. Botman injured 90% of the season last year. Dan Burn, old. Fabian Schär getting old. Kieran Trippier, a right back, as a backup right back, old. Tino Livramento, great right back. Left back Lewis Hall, who was injured last season. So the only real exciting parts that they have that's still class is their midfield of Bruno Guimaraes, Sandro Tonali, who are both hard runners, and Joelinton, who has the work ethic of a horse. He'll run the entire game. But Anthony Gordon had a pretty bad season last season. He wasn't really inspiring. You have Anthony Elanga, who came in, I think is going to be a good signing. But again, I don't think he's ever even scored double-digit goals. This isn't somebody that can save you when you let a player like Alexander Isak, who scores 20-plus goals a season, leaves. So there is this thought in my mind where it's like, is this now starting to be the downfall? Is this going to be, we have Champions League games, we're in an extra competition, we're letting our best player go, our back line is old, we haven't made any of the top signings we wanted to. Are we now going to start struggling? Are we going to have one of these seasons like Newcastle of old where we finish 10th or 11th because we're relying on young talent that hasn't ever really produced anything outstanding, like Anthony Gordon and like Anthony Gordon and like Elanga, who have never really produced insane amounts of goal output. They've kind of had this reputation off of potential, but they haven't reached it yet. So you're hoping they reach it, but if they don't, you're going to not have enough goals, and you're going to be relying on a back four who is old and struggling. So I'm getting worried, and I'm starting to think this could be the downfall of Newcastle. And now we're moving on to what I thought was interesting, was an interesting Reddit thread that also comments on what is going on at Newcastle. They go in and talk about how they're having a terrible transfer window right now and that they're not able to compete with the likes of Europe. So I just want to see what Reddit comments are saying, what people are talking about, what they think is the cause of all of this. So the top comment right now is, it all boils down to the lack of a sporting director. Newcastle made really smart signings under Ashworth, which was their last sporting director, such as Isak, Tonali, and Botman, where they targeted underrated players from European clubs that don't have much money. Even Guimaraes fits the strategy, even though his signing predates Ashworth. But since Ashworth left, they clearly haven't had any long-term strategy, which hasn't been helped by Paul Mitchell's short stint. So that's what I was talking about earlier, where it's they don't have the sporting director and they aren't making these types of smart signings where, again, if you're going for the best player of a bottom half team like Brentford or like West Ham with Mohamed Kudus and Brentford with Brian Mbeumo. The thing with that is other top six Premier League teams are going to do the same thing because those players are good enough to instantly improve their starting 11 as well as yours. So they're going to compete with you and you're going to lose. What you need to do is what Ashworth did before, which was going after Botman, who was on a team that needed that was in financial duress, wasn't the best, and they were seen as a step up from the team he was playing at to step up and go to a Newcastle to get a player like Isaac, who was at Real Sociedad, who needs money. And when you hear Newcastle and Real Sociedad, Newcastle is seen as a step up in that player's eyes. That is how a team like Newcastle needs to operate for at least the next 5 years. And if you're able to consistently overperform those next 5 years and stay in the top four, then you'll be able to build your reputation and build your global brand to where players will now see you as also a top six club. And then you can start competing with the top six like Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City, etc. for the best players in the Premier League on these lower half of the table teams. Until then, you need to be doing what you were doing of old. If not, you will struggle. That is the reality. So I think that comment is completely right. And it really is an issue of a lack of a sporting director. But I think that will come. And I think that is going to be the pivotal part of what is going on. So another person says, yeah, that this window's been frustrating. We've missed out on some key targets, but fans need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We've gone from relegation candidates to European contenders and cup winners in just a couple of seasons. That kind of progress is huge. See, I completely agree with that fan, but you need to understand, yes, you now made this great leap, but if you don't capitalize on this great leap that you've made and get the players you need, well, you're going to be back to lower half of the table, Newcastle United. The point of making these great leaps is now you're in the position to keep yourself at that level. And if you don't sign the players that will keep you at that level, and you just lean back in your chair and you're like, oh man, I'm just so happy to be here. Well, there's going to be teams like Spurs that are not happy with their season last year, and they will come back and they will buy players and they will get a new manager and they will beat you to top four. They will beat you to top six. So you can't have that mindset where you should just be happy to be here because think about 4 years ago, we were relegation candidate. That doesn't matter. He goes on to say, but we're still working with a smaller pool of realistic signings, but because we need quality over quantity, we're right on the edge of disrupting the big six, but for top players, we're still seen as a gamble compared to the clubs. That's kind of what I was talking about a little bit before, is you need a little bit more consistent years of success to then stifle these top six clubs and be seen as one of these top six clubs. What makes it more frustrating is that we're ahead of schedule and naturally fans want to build on that, but that's where PSR and financial reality kick in. So I completely agree with this. There is this weird bit of Manchester City. Newcastle's trying to follow the Manchester City formula where they're able to buy players. They want to be able to pay them great wages, pay above and beyond for players, which is what Manchester City did in the early 2010s, so that they could now be seen as this powerhouse and be seen as a big six club, which they are. But they were able to do that before PSR. Now there is PSR, so to follow the same thought process and to follow the same game plan that Manchester City did is now actually virtually impossible because you need to follow the PSR rules. So PSR is another reason why Newcastle can't really compete as well. So I think, I've given my thoughts on the downfall of Newcastle. I think this season, if they're not able to make at least 3 more signings of high quality that improve the overall depth of the squad and maybe even someone that they bring into the starting 11, I think they might have worse of a season than people can even realize. I think that defensive solidarity might not be there. These players are getting older. Dan Burn is old. Botman is old and off of an injury. Schär is getting old. Kieran Trippier is old. These players are all coming off of injuries or they are old. And all you're relying on is a very aggressive midfield and then young talents like Anthony Gordon and Alenga who have never produced insane amount of goal outputs. So I'm starting to get worried. I think this might be the start of a downfall of Newcastle that I'm not hoping for, because I actually enjoy seeing an extra team fight for the top 4, top 6 positions. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I think this summer transfer window was supposed to be so important for Newcastle, and they're really dropping the ball here. So thank you guys for listening in.